Thank you, Nicole. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the State Library as we welcome Alison Feeney, author of For the Love of Beer. My name is Ellen Schenk, and I am the Community Engagement Librarian here at the State Library. Pennsylvanians have enjoyed a long, rich love affair with beer. The state not only ranks first in the nation for the number of barrels produced, but the breweries, beer, and their craftsmen all have interesting stories to tell. This book examines Pennsylvania's brewing history, geography, and cultural richness while highlighting over 100 of the state's thriving craft breweries. It explains some of the enjoyable stories and local legends behind the naming of beers, while detailing the unique buildings and architectural treasures that contribute to the renovation of urban areas and revival of small communities. Short descriptions of each brewery provide the reader with an understanding of which brewers use local hops, fruits, and grains in their recipes, and how proceeds support local rail trails, waterways, animal shelters, and community events. From long-lasting breweries that survived Prohibition to the most recent openings with upscale food and cutting-edge technology, this book describes how craft breweries in Pennsylvania have something to offer everyone. Set out on the road and record your visit to each brewery and enjoy firsthand facts about local breweries with someone who lives, works, and studies this fascinating and dynamic industry. Alison Feeney is a professor in the Geography and Earth Science Department at Shippensburg University. She earned a BA degree in both history and geography from the University of Connecticut, an MS from Portland State University, and a PhD from Michigan State University. She truly loves to blend work with pleasure as she travels around Pennsylvania to research breweries. When she is not working, she enjoys time with her friends and family, riding bikes, playing tennis, snowboarding, kayaking, and learning to sail. Her passion for coral reefs leads her on several trips to the Caribbean each year to scuba dive and kill invasive lionfish. Welcome, Dr. Feeney.
Thank you very much. Thanks. And thank you everybody for joining today at lunch. If you are having a beer right now, I promise I won't judge you, and enjoy the talk and sip along. So hopefully in the next 30-40 minutes or so, I will give you a little bit of background about why beer is so important. Whether you choose to drink beer or not choose to drink beer, if you like it or don't, it has certainly a long history with humans and societies, and particularly currently in Pennsylvania, it is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And it has impacts in all sorts of aspects of our life. And so hopefully you'll gain a little bit appreciation for that. And if you're outside the state too, you can certainly take a lot of the same things and apply them in other regions as well. And just hopefully by the end, you might get up and go pick. A lot of these breweries have outdoor seating, are safe, and would love to have somebody to visit. So I will get on. I'm going to start with this. I am Canadian. This is one of my favorite ads. It is one, I'm biased. I was born in Montreal, and I also grew up with a golden retriever named Molson. But what I think is so great about this is, it's an ad where it never tells you the product or the company. And yet it defines a simple product such as beer, defines an entire nation. And, Foster's does the same thing. Their logo is how to speak Australian, right? And so how does such, one product like beer become, such an amazing, influential, it's now the third most consumed beverage in the world after water and tea. And it comes down to this little organism. It's probably the first domesticated organism. It is brewer's yeast, or Saccharomyces cerevisiae, and it defines what we think of as beer. It's a little organism that works away and ferments our sugars for us. It's questionable when and exactly where beer was started, but it certainly dates, a lot of evidence is, 8 to 10,000 years ago, several places around the world. It was probably developed by accident where some moisture got in and fermented moistened the barley, and somebody decided to try it. Liked it enough to try it again. And it has been argued that barley is our first crop. Society started forming, and the real reason was to brew beer. We find evidence of this all around the world. Any place where it was warm enough to ferment. So the only few places are that you don't find alcohol fermenting is, the very northern poles or southern tip. And it's really sort of this ambiguous, process and product, for many thousands of years. But by about the 10th, 11th century, we start getting to what we think of as beer today. We start getting monasteries forming, and monks lived a very solitary life, but they worked very hard. And they also provided safe housing for travelers. And so they became known as sort of these safe havens where they could get good food and drink. And beer actually starts to earn them a lot of money. And it doesn't take long for then other people to recognize how important a commodity it is. We still have quite a few breweries that do pay homage to monks. In Reading, Chatting Monks, and actually they've expanded as well. A lot of these breweries have moved into second or third locations. We have one in Ephrata. Again, quite often you can find a lot of beers and breweries that do have names after monks. Then we start getting, about 1516 is when we really start getting more formalized rules and standardized ingredients. And it's the Germans that put in this purity law, saying that beer can only be made out of barley, hops, and water. They didn't really know yeast existed, so that's not one of them, although they actually did have a position, a job called the Hefner, who he would squeeze out all the remaining foam and stuff out of the beer to try to recapture it and use it again. So they certainly knew yeast existed and was important for the next batch of beer. So those are sort of where we start getting early societies making beer. There's tons of benefits in early Europe. If you think about it, beer is very similar in a recipe to bread. However, you all know that if you leave bread out too long, especially in warmer temperatures, it's going to mold, and you can only eat it for so long, whereas beer can stay a lot longer. And so in a time period where there's not a lot of, ability to refrigerate or preserve things, beer becomes an essential ingredient for everyday sort of caloric dietary intake. And so it's not too, and there's a whole bunch of other reasons too. Europe had a lot of plagues that they'd gone through, so there was contaminated water sources. And it really just, it's a very common way of life in Europe. And so when Europeans came to North America, it's not too surprising that they brought their drinking habits with them. And so we find breweries as some of the very first buildings that get established in North America. Quite often it was shelter, a church, and a brewery would have been, the first essential places that the Europeans would have sort of erected. We find that Europeans traded beer with the native populations. The natives did make a beverage out of corn, but they certainly liked the English beer too. William Penn actually traded. This picture that I have here is Hidden River Brewing Company. It actually sits on original William Penn's land, and it is in a cool old house, and it's one of our oldest breweries that are in one of our oldest standing buildings, which is pretty neat to see. So when we think of beer today, we do have styles that are quantified by their color, their alcohol content, how they're made, things like that. And a lot of those styles do come from this early time period where we have geography, climate, water, politics, all those sorts of things impacted how beer was made and the styles that were characteristic to that region. So when Europeans first came to North America, most of them would have been drinking what we think of as ales today, porters. So the darker beers, it's made with what we call a top fermenting yeast. And that can ferment at room temperature. So this is a great one if you ever want to start home brewing, to start out with this type of beer. It doesn't really take a lot of additional work or effort to do so. We do have several breweries that have looked into the historical aspect of some of these early brews. Yards Brewing Company has actually worked with the Philadelphia Historical Society and looked at some of the recipes that our founding fathers had. So George Washington actually had a beer recipe in the back of his journal. You know, all of the original, like Sam Adams, Benjamin Franklin, they all brew beer and had breweries on their estate. And Yards does have a flight of these original styles. Out in the countryside, every homestead would have brewed beer. And this was considered a part of like the female's domestic duties. And this is where I started really sort of getting interested in brewing. When you start looking at the original settlement, and some of these pictures on the left are some of those early houses, spring houses, where they would have settled to have water. They had to claim the land. And so those plots of land, you can see the original surveys. And one of the things is these settlers had very little personal belongings. They had very little money, you know, they were subsistence, basically growing their own food, trading a little bit of extra money. And so the one thing that shows up in wills is passing on brewing equipment. And it's the one thing that was often passed on to women. And so today the beer industry is very male dominated. And I find that very interesting, the fact that, you know, within a couple hundred years, it changes from predominantly being made and served in, you know, taverns and things like that by all women into a industry that's very male dominated. So that was sort of where I started kind of getting my interest in it. We do find we have spring Brewing Company is one located in Lancaster. And we also have several that really specialize in farm style ales, which again were characteristic today we think of as Belgium and France, but that would have been sort of the style that a lot of those early settlers living out in the, you know, kind of the rural countryside would have produced. Taverns become essential in the formation of North America. We get our Constitution written in a tavern. They would have been the place where everybody would have gotten their news. This one here is the first tavern west of Susquehanna. It sits in Shippensburg, and it was the county courthouse for a while, the post office, you know, hotel, food, lodging, all those sorts of things would have been in there. And it was run by a woman, which again would have been very characteristic of the times. What we start changing though is we start getting an influx of more German immigrants around the beginning of the 1820s, 1840s, and they bring with them a lager yeast. Which is a slightly different variation of that brewer's yeast. And it's what we refer to as bottom fermenting. And it requires colder temperatures. So it's actually not just a yeast, it's a process, it's how the beer is made. And that beer requires, it takes a bit longer to ferment and cooler temperatures. And so it's not too surprising that it started in Germany, where they would cut out caves and keep it cool over the winter. And so when we start getting that style in North America as well, it requires those, and we start finding caves being cut out in a variety of these breweries to store those colder temperatures. The other thing about the lager is that it's much lighter in color, and it's crisper, cleaner, and it really took off in North America with the warmer, hotter, milder summers. And that lager yeast strain and the immigrants that came with it really transformed the brewing industry. It went from those small little taverns brewing their own beer, or the beer that's made at a local like household kind of level, into an industrial, and now it's a global mega, billion-dollar industrial industry. And so from that 1840 period on, beer gets transformed again, that small little tavern to this big global product. In Philadelphia, we start getting some of those original immigrants. We get Brewery Town actually starts up, and not does it just have all the large breweries, but all the infrastructure to have those work. So you start getting the first electricity, and that electricity gets transformed from the industry workplace into residentials, and we start getting the first households with electricity. We start getting the steam engine being used. There's all sorts of inventions that are used for the brewing industry that then start to dissipate into the rest of the part of life. Our first urban street that was paved was New York City, but it happened because of, when you're making beer, there's a lot of wastewater, and they would just throw the water out the window and all the streets would get really muddy. And so eventually they started to pave the streets. And so that's where we start getting a lot of, inventions from this industry start going into other aspects of life. Brewery Town has since kind of gone into decay. It is sort of in a period of revival right now. And just in the last few years, we did get our first brewery post-Prohibition has opened up. It's called Crime and Punishment in Brewery Town. But as we start going farther west, that's where we start getting some of our larger breweries. Yuengling and Son is obviously one of the more famous ones. It's registered as the longest, the oldest continuously brewing in America. Again, this is that lager yeast strain, where if you go on the tour here, which I highly suggest, it's free and it's very fun. You walk across and you actually go into the old tunnels that they dug out. And then you can also see the walls that the government tried to put up during Prohibition. It's a very interesting tour. And that spread from Yuengling out west to the larger breweries that we have today, like Budweiser and Coors, all have that same lager, German immigrant sort of background story to them. We start getting through a time period of industry and mass production, and which I could go on for hours in itself, but it's not just the beer industry. It's all sorts of aspects that go from like transportation, refrigerated boxcars, all sorts of things. But basically the beer industry becomes much more efficient, and we start getting our really large global companies. And so, we've developed these brewery, again, like Budweiser. Bud Light, is one of, I think it still remains the top beer selling beer in the world. And these are they've actually now been consolidated into two major global companies. But again, they all start off from that original sort of immigrant and moving out west. So most breweries started to consolidate. We were lucky in Pennsylvania. We have two that did survive Prohibition. Straub is called a legacy beer. It's in St. Mary's. Again, also another really great tour in Yuengling. But most of our breweries started consolidating. This Iron City in Pittsburgh, for example, is one that had to keep, buying up smaller breweries. It tried to survive for the longest time. It sort of held on, and I'm saying sort of because that's using the word easily. It eventually gets, sort of bought out. And just in the last year or two, it's been purchased again. There's still hope of trying to revive it. You can see in the lower right corner, the Iron City on billboards. They're still trying to bring back sort of that iconic beer of Pittsburgh. But most of the breweries really kind of decline. And you can see here's a chart from 1873 where we have the sort of the peak of those local small taverns, and you start getting consolidation into the Prohibition time where it drops off. And then post-Prohibition, again, a few survive, but again, you're sort of consolidating. By the late 70s, early 80s, about 95% of all the beer was housed by about 5 or 6 companies. So what changes is President Jimmy Carter legalizes home brewing, which right now kind of seems like, funny thing that it wasn't legal. But if you think distilling is still not, it's called moonshine, that's not something that distillers are allowed to practice. Right? And so home brewing becomes legal. So in our that is passed at a federal level. However, each state is still able to mandate its own alcohol laws. And so each state then can make different legalization of brew pubs. And so it really takes about 2 decades for brew pubs for people to actually start sampling beer. And what that does is it allows people to start picking up on the idea that beer doesn't just taste like that light lager. There's different flavors to it. And, they can really kind of invest in that. And that is where the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation contacted me in 2015 and said they found that people that donate to environmental causes like craft beer, and it's probably one of our state's most violated law, but it is illegal to drink in a state park. And so they wanted to try to figure out, could they combine maybe photo shoots at local or events at breweries that were near state parks. And that's where I mapped them all. At that point, we had 159 in the state. And you can see the growth. Again, we get legalization in the mid 80s. We get a few breweries starting to pick up into the 90s, but it's really that second half of the last decade where we start to get an explosion of breweries. And just to kind of give you a few statistics on this is 2016. The reason I have this date here is if you see in the middle part that barrels of production, that is the year that Pennsylvania overtook California as the largest producer of craft beer in the nation. Last year, I think we dipped back down. We're now the second largest. California went back up, but you can also see some of the other, the economic impact, nearly a $6 million impact to the state per capita. And 2017, it continues. Again, brewing, craft breweries keep improving. The number keeps going. Here's a few more at 2017 and 2018. Sort of still the number one production in the country, and you can see the distribution of them. 2017, this map, you can see all the breweries, wineries, and cideries that we have in the state. And you can see how that craft industry beverage is really dissipated throughout the entire state. We have quite a lot of it. I did look at the licenses last night. And PLCB legally stands for the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board, has to put on all the licenses. We have 477 active licenses, 32 pending, 23 in safekeeping, and 149 expired. And so you can see that the number still continues to grow. Even within the Harrisburg area, even during COVID, breweries have still continued to open. And Wolf Brewing is actually opening today. If you are he has been, this is a brewery that's really been hyped up for a long time because he has won awards, I think, in every state for his home brewing competitions. And I'm really looking forward to getting to visit this one. And it is opening, I think, at 3 o'clock today. So you can run out if you're in the area. In terms of other breweries, many of them are expanding into second or third locations. And so with their licenses, they can actually, a brewery can serve at at 3 different locations. And so many of them are expanding. This one is Yards in Philadelphia, which went from a decent sized kind of little pub to an enormous building, which sort of shares about half of a city block in Philadelphia. So when I started mapping them all and started seeing how many, I started traveling and going to visit them all. And that's where I really kind of fell in love with the buildings, these small towns that they're helping out. Here's one in Mount Joy, where the catacombs, you can see they're dug 22 feet underground. That was for those lager beers that they would have needed the colder temperatures. Places like Carbondale, which are pretty, their downtowns are a little on the diminishing side, and yet you have a brewery there and people are eating at them, during the day and, in the middle of the place. So again, tried to go throughout the state to all these little breweries and visit and talk with them all. So that led to the idea of how they are impacting the development. And almost all of these breweries are reusing old spaces. And some of these spaces have been vacant for decades. And some of them are really important buildings. This is Church Brew Works in Pittsburgh, which is on the National Historical Registry. This one is Battlefield Brew Works in Gettysburg, and it is an old Confederate field hospital. It's a beautiful old building. I love the natural light in it. And yeah, you actually have the old horsehair paint on the wall that chips off and, while you drink. Governor Snyder is the first governor who lived west of the Susquehanna. He is Pennsylvania's only 3-term governor, and he was the first politician in the whole US to speak out against slavery. And so these are really, unique places that are very much part of our past. And because of the breweries, the people are able to go in and interact with these spaces and learn about them. Some of these breweries have done amazing things to small towns. This is Braddock. This is one I highly suggest people go to if you're ever on the western part of the state. They have won blind taste tests for their IPAs. Everything they make is really good. But the 2 young guys basically started this brewery, and they have really transformed Braddock, which is an old steel town and ironworks that has been in decay and had all the negative issues that go along with a declining town. And they have brought back a very prosperous business where people are going, spending money, hanging out. Tattered Flags in Middletown is another one. The town spent a lot of money on the cityscape, improving the clock and the streets. And this was an old Elks Club that had been vacant for years right downtown, and they have done a great job. It's always busy, lunch, dinners, they have public events and all sorts of things there. A couple other cool buildings. This is Mount Vernon Hotel, which is now a brewery. They have often taken over old industrial parts of the city that, again, had remained vacant. This sits on the corner that in the 80s was known for the Italian mafia. And again, you can see they still they got bars on the windows still. It's not the safest place, but at least they are in there. They are working during the day. They provide a lot of, community presence there. This one is Love City. This brewer is a registered judge, tasting judge, beer judge, and I really encourage, he knows his stuff. And if ever I get to, it's in an old train station, so it's not the most, you have to sort of go down a back alley to get to that, but it is definitely worth, and it's actually very close to the yards and the other Roy Pit, so it's not too far a walk to get to. The Lawrenceville neighborhood in Pittsburgh, really is, just has a whole bunch. I have breweries listed here, but there's other wineries, distilleries, other restaurants, and it's a very thriving neighborhood. And certainly in downtown Harrisburg, you find the same thing. We have 0 Day in the Millworks, right down amongst a whole bunch of other independent businesses that really make Midtown a really unique place because of it. Part of the things that they do is they contribute to local artists. So anything from their decor to their woodworking to any of the, their tap handles, all those sorts of things generally are made by local artists. They try to serve a lot of local foods. If possible, they try to use local agriculture, and has spurred on other industries. We now, for the first time, start to see local malters in the state. We have the first few, Deer Creek here was the first post-Prohibition to open up, and they are starting to formalize and be a coherent sort of industry chain there. And then obviously yeast too. Most brewers will purchase yeast, but several are trying to capture wild yeast. And if you see a sign like this, it means that a good chunk of that beer has products that are made either hops, local fruit, barley, or in this case, this beer was had used all 4 local ingredients. A lot of breweries give their grains back to feed cattle. And the real benefit of having a local business is a lot of the money that you spend in your local area stays in your community. If you go to like a Texas Roadhouse or, Panera Bread, chances are the majority of that money is going to go off to corporate headquarters and leave your town. Whereas a lot of the local breweries do support all sorts of other related industries, anything from the t-shirts that they're wearing to local, bands, to again, all sorts of other things. I put this one in this as related industry. I got this in the mail yesterday, so I have not read them. But we have now, an author who's going around to breweries and writing little mystery stories. And I figured as a talk to a library, you guys might want to hear about that. So I believe they're available on Amazon. And yeah, I thought that was a really fun way to bring in, travel and seeing the different breweries and having a story to go with it. Most of the breweries really give back to communities. Most of them are very family oriented. So there's always this negative imagery with alcohol. And I'm the first to recognize there's certainly negative effects. And I really encourage people, have a designated driver and don't, overconsume and things like that. But at the breweries, it's much more a family-oriented place than it is. It's not like a bar where people are going just to drink. Most of them are going to hang out, to chat, to eat, to see those things. And a lot of those breweries do give back to their community events. In this case, they were giving back the sale from, every beer gives back to the rail trail. I'm a huge fan of bicycling and having community assets like a rail trail. Here, Conshohocken is an awesome trail that you can easily ride down and stop and have a beer and, have a great afternoon. Rusty Rails is another one. This is a great destination location. Kind of in the middle of nowhere, but it's right along a rusty rail. And it's a great way. I don't know if it's a 7 or 15 mile bike ride. I can't remember. But the rail is right there. So you can easily park, go for a bike ride and come back. They have amazing food and drinks and you can hang out on their deck. And that really gets to experiential tourism, which is a growing industry around the world, but certainly in North America. Post 9/11, people wanted to sort of stay home and really get at what we call agritourism. The idea of when you travel looking for something somewhat peaceful, but you want to kind of learn about things on the way. And so people want to go and learn about how their beer is made. And a lot of these breweries do have tours, or they are very happy to talk to you. So, you just sit at the bar, which is now luckily legal again in Pennsylvania, and you can sit and ask questions. And you can, that's their livelihood. And so most of the brewers and the people that are working are very happy to tell you anything and all they know about what they're making. And so that's what's really fun. A lot of the breweries have kind of tapped into this. Trogs is sort of a mecca or a pilgrimage. If you like beer, I highly encourage you at some point, make the trip. You can see from their map that people from all over the world go and visit it by the number of pins in it. And every time they expand, they try to enhance that visitor experience so people can learn more and more. There's a lot of self-guided tours, as well as you can sign up and go through other tours too. So touring breweries is certainly becoming a destination in itself. And so there are tons of different ale trails. This is the Pennsylvania one put on by the Brewers Association. It's an app. And so as soon as you get close, when you're in the brewery, your phone picks up the GPS. So you just click stamp passport. And after so many, you get different prizes. And that's just the State Brewers Association, but a lot of other tourism agencies have similar events, whether they are sort of planned activities, or if you get prizes at the end, but that does become a whole, again, a destination in itself to do that. Part of the excitement of going is what we call neolocalism. And it's that we're in an era where we're in a very sort of mass-produced generic. And so it's a way to kind of get a little bit of something different. And people want to learn about a local environment. And so that's where breweries really tap into this by the naming of their beers. All the types of, this one here is in Wilkes-Barre, where it really shows all the, the past mining industry that went on. And those breweries kind of tell stories by the name, again, the names, the stories that they have. And people learn about that as they're reading the menus, seeing all the different, here up near Penn State, all the agricultural aspects of the town. This is, sports and beer always go great. This, if you remember when the Eagles won the Super Bowl, this is Elliott here up in the top left corner. He is the kicker. He actually came to Chambersburg. He wears the number 4. And if you remember, he had one of the winning kicks in the football. So he actually helped brewed a beer. And those are the types of stories that a lot of breweries want to try tapping into. Conversely, if you like beer, football and beer, that Weyerbacher has Dallas sucks. And if you are a Penn State fan, we are for Stable 12 or the 409 for Paterno. And those are the types of things that people learn along the way. And that's really what my book is sort of dedicated to. It's these brewers, anybody can drink a beer. And a lot of people chug beer without really thinking about it. But to these people who make it, it's their livelihood. They have put a lot of thought and effort into what you're drinking, from the ingredients to the process it's made, to the naming of it, to the packaging, and to the serving of it. And so that's really what my book is getting at, is to try to give you some of those stories and to give you a little bit of the background. Whether, the industries, you can tell how fast it's evolving and how many new. So it's not intended to have every brewery listed there, but hopefully it gets you at some of those ideas of why it's important and why you can sort of see how, if you find a different brewery, what to look for when you go to it. And so one of the things that people often ask me is, how does Pennsylvania differ from other places? In some cases, we don't. This is trends that are occurring not just in the US, but in other countries around the world. You can see, you know, breweries are taking off all over the place, particularly like California, Pacific Northwest, Colorado. Those are places that have commonly been known. But again, that production, we do produce the first or second, depending on which year it is, amount of craft breweries in production in the nation. But I think what really kind of makes Pennsylvania different is that authenticity. Those breweries that I showed you have been there since, you know, early settlement. They are reusing the past. A lot of those breweries are tapping into that. And that's much different than, you know, I love Tampa Bay and Clearwater. They have a great, you know, especially in the wintertime, it's fun. They have a great beer scene, but they don't have that authentic historical sort of thing to tap into. It's more of current tourism aspect. And then just to kind of wrap up with one of my latest studies was I actually did a study where I compared the beer on tap between London and Philadelphia. Using Untapped, I did a 3-mile, and I worked with Johnny Garrett, who is from the Craft Beer Channel, if you know him, YouTuber. We looked at 3-mile radius around Philadelphia and London to kind of look at the styles, the beer, and were there any differences? In some cases, there's actually a lot of similarities. The number of actual places serving, their number of draft lines, there seems to be a very common pattern between the two cities. However, like a lot of American beers, craft beers are much more bitter and stronger. And so, but the British beer, the pints are bigger over there. So it equals out, I think, in the end. And so it's just kind of a fun study to kind of look at how the two cities sort of compared. All right, and I'm going to wrap up with this. One of the things that I'm doing now at Shippensburg is, as I've traveled around and talked to a lot of places, is there's very few places to learn brewing. We have a few academies on a global scale, but very few. And a lot of brewers are learning this from trial and error in their garage. And so we've actually started a brew science program at Shippensburg. We do teach some homebrewing classes, but most of the time they are short courses intended for the industry. So like we have a class which is on beer styles. We have one just on water chemistry. Right now I'm finishing up one on hops for the brewing industry, where we're working with a hop farmer and a brewer. And it's really been sort of a fun way to try to connect that education aspect with a very dynamic industry, and hopefully provide a skilled workforce so that Pennsylvania, I always say, we don't want to just produce the most beer, but we want to produce the best beer too. And so that's sort of where my interests and sort of directions have gone. And I know we're coming up. I know I was talking fast, and I can hang around and talk hours for beer. So I'm more than happy to hang out and ask questions. But I will end up with, a lot of people say, well, am I coming out with a second book or anything like that? Although I love writing books, and I love writing about these stories. One of the things that I have kind of really sort of gotten passionate about is I am now a beer lady. I have a TikTok account, and my goal is to eventually travel around and do all the tours of breweries. Obviously, in the last year, I have tried to stay home as much as possible, and but I'm hoping, as of today, I am my second vaccination, and I'm hoping to go out and start touring more. So if you are on TikTok, or if you're not, you should, because it's fun. Join me, and cheers. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Alison. I'll definitely be following you on TikTok. I like your Lady 2020 logo. If anybody has questions, please add them to the chat. We can go through here. Or if you want to unmute and ask questions, I don't know if that's optional.
Okay, so Alison, I have a question.
Okay.
What's a good way for a beer lady number 2 to get into this industry besides getting a certificate course?
Well, so in terms of what, are you hoping to maybe open a brewery, or you want to work at a brewery or write about breweries, or?
I don't know. I'm open, but I am signed up for the brew course at Point Park University, just starting June 7th.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, there are definitely some increasingly online courses to learn brewing, and that's certainly one good way. I went through, there's a Cicerone certification course, which gives you knowledge about different brews. There is the Cybele Academy too, out of Chicago. I've gone and taken their course. In terms of actual brewing process, you just have to get in and do it. Sometimes some breweries will actually, like, if you have enough time, will let you kind of work. They all want some sort of internship experience. That's been part of our program that we've been working at SHIP, is try to how to actually get a little bit of hands-on experience before sending people out to a brewery. And we're actually working with a brewery. It's in place. So at Shippensburg, we have what we call professional continuing distance education. And we are trying to work on a course where people would come in occasionally and work at a local brewery to learn how to brew over the, and
Okay.
actually go through a large scale brewing process.
Okay, so one more question.
Yeah.
We're having a contest. What kind of beer do you think could win a contest?
There's tons of stuff. Some home, like there's home brewing competitions, and those are kind of fun to go to. You will see some people try to make the most unique stuff, which is really cool. But if you're eventually wanting to sell beer, like people wanting just a couple sips of it doesn't seem like a good business model. So having something kind of like easy, palatable, very refreshing, crisp, to me, where they want to have a second and a third one seems to be a better business model. And then, but I've been to competitions too, where some people really get into some of the historic, like they go through all the old ingredients, they go with natural, products, and those are interesting too. So it just, there's a lot of different aspects to brewing. So it's kind of fun that way to do it.
Okay, one more question. If you would say, if there's a hole in the brewing industry in beer, what could there be to fill that hole? There's so much variety.
Well, I was going to say the whole is diversity. So the industry is very still male dominated, both production and consumption. And so that's something that has been like when I go and do a lot of my interviews, it's always in the daytime. And usually in the day is not the time where majority, I will say I'm the only woman in there, and that's intimidating. And that's, that's something I've kind of overcome. If you go to a brewery at night, that's where you tend to have like groups of people or like couples going out, and then you see a bigger diversity. I'm obviously white, but again, if you go you don't see a lot of other, anybody but white. And also, when it comes to sexual preferences too. So there are different, the brewers themselves tend to be very, very accommodating, and it's something that the industry, the Brewers Association, has tried to address, and they spend a lot of their annual meeting talking about how to include it, but the consumer market just isn't there. And so there's definitely a gap in that diversity issue.
Okay.
And
Thanks.
so, yeah, one of my things if you follow on TikTok, is I make a lot of jokes about seltzers. Just because I'm partly White Claw, but to me, they're flavorless, but a lot of women are so afraid of drinking calories or drinking carbohydrates. And so they'll drink like 12 White Claws because they think their diet, whereas, they could probably have really one or two good beers and actually be filled probably have a higher ABV and, actually enjoy what they're drinking. And so to me, that's sort of why the industry is really expanding with the hard seltzers right now. They're relatively cheap and it fits that female demographic market that the beer market didn't have.
Oh, thank you so much. I agree with you. I like the high carb, higher ABV.
I just like something that tastes good.
If you ever get down our way, Helltown Brewery, Export Mount Pleasant, try their Warlock.
Warlock. All right. Good to know. I'm writing it down.
All right, Amber Ale.
Alison, what are your top, say, 5 breweries?
People always ask me that. To me, it's very much about the experience rather than the beer. And even as I talk, you'll notice, don't get me wrong, I've drank my beer share, but it's the experience. I love some of the breweries. I love a staff that knows what they're talking about. Like if you go in and you ask somebody and somebody's selling the beer but doesn't know anything about it, the brewer could be awesome, but there's not that connection there. And so, yeah, a few of my favorites, Shy Bear is one that I highly recommend. The beer is good. The food is great. They really connect with their local environment. They're all solar paneled. And I can't, the actual town, it's just sort of northwest of Harrisburg up the river a little bit. Can't think of the actual town that they're located in. Stable 12, Phoenixville is, first of all, great. Phoenixville is up there nationally in terms of number of breweries per square mile. And so that is a great one if you want to sort of spend a day or a weekend where you just kind of walk down a street and sample a couple different ones. And the variety there, Root Down is at one end of town where it's an old soda factory. So it's really big, graffiti on the wall. It's just this cool vibing place. The other side is Stable 12, which is up there as one of my favorites, partly because it's a very small little place. And that's where I like to me, the experience, being able to talk to somebody, whether it be, somebody at the bar or somebody, sitting, whatever, or friends that you go with, they have little tables outside. I love that social interaction to learn about the beer too. And those are some. Victory is an incredible brewery. They do a lot with sustainability, solar, reuse of energy. They have paired up, so they are now I think the 12th or 13th largest brewery in the nation. Trogs, of course, is about, I think they're 27th maybe in the nation. And so we have a couple really large, significant breweries. One that opened in COVID, which is higher on my list to get to, is Brewdog, which is a very interesting company based mostly out of Scotland. They have their other in Ohio, but they just opened up one during COVID in Pittsburgh, and that's on my list to get to. So I could go to them all if you can't tell. Just need more time. I always say I got to quit my day job to go. With 400 breweries in one state, you can't do that in a year. So.
You could if you really challenged yourself. Let's see. Do we have any more questions?
Okay, I think the one question I had, you misunderstood when I said a hole in the industry. I'm saying let's say if you were to make a beer that you think there isn't a good representation of, what is there that is missing? Like we have fruit beer, we have hops beer, what is there?
Well, so the industry is changing. When I said, it's male dominated, it is that traditional beer drinker was probably a 55 to 65-year-old male. And our taste buds change as you age. And so if you think of like sweet, sour, whatever, umami, bitter is the last one that you lose. And so that's why kids tend to like really sweet stuff. And so that original, when craft breweries were coming out and you had that demographics, that's why IPAs became so popular. And some of them became like just offensively bitter. Some people love that stuff, but again, it's one that, you know, if your business model is to sell something and somebody can only have one of it, also bitterness is like getting used to spicy food. So the more you have of it, you get this drift, this bitter drift. And so the more bitter you have, the more you want these really bitter IPAs. And so that was really the market for years. As this younger demographic has come in to sort of explore breweries, they have more of a sweet tooth. And so that's why we now have our hazy IPAs. And that the hazy IPA is brewed slightly differently, where they dry hop the beer afterwards. And so the beer still has the great aromas of hops, but not without that real strong bitterness to it. And so you get a real sort of citrusy, some beers can be almost like drinking orange juice. And that's really taken over the market just in the last 3 to 5 years. So when you want to make a beer, if it's not in the market, there's probably a reason for it. You know, again, it's study that I did that I said with the Philadelphia one in London, you know, we found some pretty unique beer styles, but they were only on tap in one location, you know, or like that random beer. And that is the cool thing with small craft breweries, is that they have the ability to do that. Like the large breweries can only manufacture the same recipe. They can't kind of twist things, whereas small breweries can kind of adapt and see what works. And so, you know, there are, you know, predominantly about 5 to 10 styles of beer that are consistent at every brewery. And yeah, you may really like something kind of unique, but chances are other people don't. And that's probably why it's not being sold as much. So again, I guess it depends on, like, again, if you're trying to be a really unique beer, but again, that's not going to be a great business model.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm gonna get that beer lady TikTok.
Well, tell me what your handle is, so I will know, because yeah, a lot of people or like comment on one of mine and I'll know who you are then.
Okay, and if you're ever in Pittsburgh area, you can look me up, because I'd like to have someone to go drink beer with.
Okay,
My
awesome.
dad, my husband, nobody drinks beer that I'm close to.
Well, the great thing about these breweries is there's usually some good food too. If you're in Pittsburgh, that Cinderlands has amazing food.
Okay.
Yeah, they have 2 locations, but I think one deals more with small plates, and it was really, really good.
And I'm sure you've been to Hofbrauhaus too.
Yeah, that's fun.
Very good.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. If you want to check out Alison's book, please look for it in local bookstores. I know the Midtown Scholar has it. I'm sure you can order it through Amazon. If there are any final questions, let me see here. No, I think we're good. Thank you so much. Please check back and see what further programs the State Library is putting out soon. And
Thank
you so much.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah, have a great day.
Go have a beer.
Yeah, I